I always have to start with honoring my ancestors because that's the world I come from. I want to particularly dedicate this talk, as I often do, to my grandmother, Maria Alvarez Guevara Galan. She was born and raised in Nicaragua. Those are my maternal grandparents up there. My grandmother was a medicine woman and also owned a store, and she was one of those people who was really ahead of her time, did not go to school, yet was able to manage a store and a business and take care of her family. She had 13 children in Nicaragua, all of them born in her home, surrounded by people she loves, with parteras and midwives around her. None of those children were lost in childbirth, which is not an expectation we might have of that time in Nicaragua. So there's a lot of wisdom our ancestors had and a lot of medicine that sometimes we forget in our modern context. And she had this beautiful gift of being in her leadership and running her store, teaching good values to her children, but also having a really compassionate heart. If there were young families in the community that were really kind and good people, but really struggling financially, she would work with them in the store, you know, to put things on credit or give them a reduced price, because she never let her need to take care of her business get in the way of being a compassionate, good woman. I think she was ahead of her time in a lot of ways. And when she was very ill, she made a request of my grandfather that he transfer the property of the house out of his name to all of the daughters. She said, I know if the daughters retain ownership of the house, they'll always take care of the sons. But if you do what is traditional, hand it over to the oldest son, he'll probably get married, kick everybody else out, get drunk, lose the house and gambling, you know. And the house is still there in Nicaragua. And the sons can all stay there whenever they want. So there's something she knew. She was just a woman ahead of her time. She's one of the ancestors that most guides me on my path as a medicine woman, and she was a medicine carrier in Nicaragua too. So I just always make sure that I honor her. And also just given what we're talking about, families, trust, intergenerational passing of knowledge, honoring what families come with. My mother reflected something very back to me not long ago. My mother had 6 children, and 3 were born. 3 were born alive, 3 were born stillborn. And she lost them near the end of her pregnancy. And she reflected back that she had her 6 children here in modern hospitals, surrounded by strangers without traditional medicine. And she lost half her children. And yet her mother, long ago, was able to bring a lot of children in healthily because of the way they were brought in. So I bring that in because some of these issues of trust and relationship are about honoring that the families we work with carry a lot of wisdom that sometimes is invisible to us. So I'll do the usual kind of Western thing of telling you some research and some papers, but then I want to go back to, like, there's actually wisdom within us and in our families, which we don't need research papers to validate, but we try to do both, right? Walk both worlds. So I want to share one paper that I found that I think is a really good one, and you can find it on the NCAI website. It's called Walk Softly and Listen Carefully, Building Research Relationships with Tribal Communities. It's a longer report. It's 30-some-odd pages. It's a really good report, though. It's more about participatory research, but there's a lot of lessons that can be applied for the work that you're doing. And so a lot of what they talked about building trust with communities is about listening and paying attention. Make sure that we're listening as much as we're talking. To respect cultural and local knowledge. People come from so many different places in the United States. What a blessing that we're so diverse. And that also means they carry a lot of different cultural and local knowledge that can tap into why they're living the way they're living and things that can help them on their path. And also why they may be having challenges in this society. It's also really important to leave preconceived assumptions behind, to have an open heart and open mind. We don't always know why people are doing what they're doing or why they're struggling. I also work a lot in mindfulness. I used to be the director of the East Bay Meditation Center. And I remember going to a meeting around mindfulness and contemplative practice a long time ago. And I met this really amazing woman who does a lot of mindfulness work with teachers and to try to help them be more mindful with their students. And what was really fascinating, she shared this really interesting story about teaching mindfulness to a teacher and how much that teacher was changed, because she said she had a young girl who would always show up late. And this is, I don't remember what grade it was, but it was like first or second grade. It was a very small child. It wasn't an older child. The child was always coming in late. And she would get very angry at that child because she was always coming late to school. And she would yell at her and tell her, you have to get here on time, you know, there'd be some consequence for it. And the practice still continued that she would come in late. And so at some point, she actually started withholding the child's free breakfast in the morning because she was angry. And then after she started taking the mindfulness course, she suddenly got curious about the child. Why is the child late? Instead of just punishing her, let me figure out why she's late. And she went to the home, talked to the mother. It was a single mom. She was working 2 or 3 jobs, you know, getting no sleep. That child was actually walking herself to school by herself across a really dangerous part of town because she valued her education so much, and her mom was asleep because she would come home in the middle of the night. She was so dedicated to getting to school, but she was getting herself dressed. She was really scared as she was walking to school and figuring it out on her own. And when she found out that story, just her heart broke open. And she tried to figure out how she might support the family. The good part about that story wasn't just that it made her curious about the mom. She started examining, why did I behave the way I did with that child? And she started going back and thinking about how her parents, particularly her father, had this high cultural value around timeliness and the shaming that she received when she was a child, when she was not on time, and how that transferred to this child, and realized, I don't want to do that with her, and I have to be mindful about not reliving these patterns that I was taught that were not healthy when I'm interacting with families and children. And so I think that thing about preconceived assumptions, we weren't all raised with the same ideals around time in particular. I'm first to say that I come from a family that, you know, if I say the party starts at noon, my aunts will all show up at 1 o'clock. So when I was a kid and I had a birthday party, I would tell all my friends at school 12 o'clock, and I would tell my aunts 11 a.m. so that they would get there at 12 o'clock. So, you know, knowing that, having an open heart and mind that people navigate the world really differently, and they have different values around that. It doesn't mean the same thing to everybody, so be curious. Have integrity, establish trust with people, be authentic, and act with humility. And I really want to stress cultural humility there because we are raised with very different cultural values. Think about having shared goals with the families that you work with, because if you are struggling with a family in some way, or there's some breakdown in trust, try to meet them not from a place of shame like that teacher did with her child, but to be like, you know, I have a goal, I want to support you. Let's set some goals together about how I can support you, where you want to go with your family, and that can go a long way in helping folks move forward with you and in partnership with you. And this particular thing was about indigenous tribes here in the U.S. And that learning applies here too. Learn about the people that you're working with. What cultures do they come from? Ask them about their cultures and learn about them. And then plan for sustainability for yourself as well as the families. I have seen so many people in the work that I do in community work and organizing just burn out. It's really good work, but there's a reason in the airplane they tell you to put your oxygen mask on you first before you give it to your child. I really want to stress to you to take care of yourself. One of the stories I like to share about that, which has been a big breakthrough for me, is I think that a lot of women in particular, and caregivers of all sorts that work with families, because I know we have men here too, that we're really acculturated to give and give and give and not take care of ourselves, and to feel really guilty when we take care of ourselves, or I could have done one more thing. And one of the big breakthroughs I had with my husband a few years ago, and I'm really grateful to him for this learning, I was going through a period before my menopause where I was bleeding really heavily. And I didn't know that there was a term for this called flooding. And about a quarter of women go through this when they're approaching menopause. I was super weak, really anemic because of the amount of blood I was losing over those days. I think it was 17 or 19 days. I can't remember how many it was, but I was really, really weak. And me being a community organizer, a movement builder, running nonprofits, I was used to just having a lot on my plate, and that I couldn't do anything then. And my husband had to help me a lot because I was so weak. And I remember when I got better, it took a while to get back my body back to normal. My husband said to me, I want to say something to you, and I hope you don't get mad. I was like, okay, time to practice my mindfulness, get centered, loving, receptive, open, right? Open mind. And he said, it felt really good when you were that sick because it felt really good to take care of you. You're this Wonder Woman passing bills in the world and doing all these things. He's like, it's the first time I felt like you really needed me. It's the first time you let me take care of you. It's the first time I felt purpose as your husband. I don't want you to be half dead for me to feel needed by you. And the big aha moment that I had in that moment was that I feel really good when I help people. Do you feel good when you help people? Doesn't it feel great? It makes you feel like you have purpose in the world. And I realized to the extent that I don't let people help me, I'm actually being really selfish and ego-driven because I'm not letting them feel the joy I feel by helping someone else. And also I realized I set a power dynamic, a power imbalance between my husband and I, where I was always the helper, he was always the helpee. And that was not a partnership. And so I invite you to consider where that might be playing out with the families that you work with. Where is it a partnership? Where are you in relationship in this way where it doesn't feel to them like they're coming to you that way? So yeah, a lot of big ups to my husband for the courage it took to tell me that. Really appreciate it. And I think as caregivers, it's really important to reflect on those lessons that everything is a relationship, everything is a dynamic and flow of energy. Everybody has wisdom. Everybody needs support sometimes. And then there's another paper I wanted to share that is from Australia. And this one is called Kids Matter, Australian Early Childhood Mental Health Initiative, and they have a series of papers. Their third one is on working with parents and caregivers. And so some of the values they were talking about was everyone is equal and contributes in different ways. Another one of my elders who I really respect is a woman named Patsy Nanj, and she's an elder in the East Bay. And she taught me this really beautiful tool of the medicine wheel when she's working with organizations. And that there's different kinds of people with different kinds of gifts in the world. There's eagle people who are very visionary. There's deer who are very relational. I imagine a lot of you are deer because of the work that you chose. The buffalo people are people who like to make work plans and get things done. And then the bear people are very data-driven, analytical, people who like to look at the details. We need all of those people in the world. And sometimes we think the thing that we are is the most important thing, but we need a balance of those things. And so even within our families, someone may be different from you, but they may bring a very unique and important gift when they're coming to you. Each person being valued and respected for what they think, even if there are differences, is very important as well. Listening and talking to each other. Making an effort to understand and trust other people's points of view. And checking in with each other when making important decisions. And following a parent or caregiver's lead. I think that at heart, everybody wants the best for their families. And I think people are often struggling with the conditions of their lives. And I think also we don't have a lot of safe spaces to really talk about what we're struggling with sometimes. And so when you can be that safe place, that landing place for someone to really be vulnerable with you, then you might be able to have some huge breakthroughs with them. And that may be one of the few places that they have that capacity. A similar story about this one's about my father. Many years ago, I went through a personal development program where we had to look at our blind spots about how we relate with the people in our lives. And mine came up around my dad. It was really interesting, and it had a lot of domino effects with my husband. But it was interesting because I grew up in a family and a culture where machismo and cheating and, disrespect is normal, allowable. And so there were emotions I had about that growing up. I think my father's a very different person now than he was when I was a child, but I definitely had some resentment around some of those cultural ideals. as a young girl. But I also remember, just as I grew up and studied psychology, having compassion for the way my parents were raised, what they learned, what they were taught, and also the struggles and conditions they encountered when they were growing up in Nicaragua and their families encountered, that shaped who they became. And despite having that compassion, I still had this story in my head that my dad was a very limited person who suffered a lot, and he wasn't going to ever be able to be a certain way. And then I remember having this breakthrough. It's like, well, I'm doing personal development in my adulthood. Why do I tell the story that my dad can't do that? He may or may not, but I'm choosing a story that he is the way he is and he's never going to change. So I called him up, I remember, as part of my homework while I was in the class. And I said, hey, Dad, I really love you. I think you're a great father, and I know you did the best you could, and I don't think I've ever told you that. And this is a guy who's very emotionally, closed off growing up. He just started crying. And he said, I really did do the best I could. And I really love you, and I really love your mother, and I really love your husband. I really love you. He's like he'd been uncorked. It was really beautiful. Really, really beautiful to hear all this beauty come out of his mouth. And then we went on a trip not long after that where he wanted to tell me all about his childhood, many things he'd never told even my mom. And I realized in that moment, my father is in his 70s, and this is the first safe place he's ever had to tell his story without being judged, without being fixed, without being told where he messed up. And I was like, wow, I've had that all my life with my sister. I've had that with my mama. But he's never had that. And it was ironic that that was happening when I was trying to heal things with my husband around some of this stuff. I realized how I was playing out some of the same patterns with my husband that I was with my father. And I was also being pulled in to lead Boys and Men of Color Alliance work in the state of California with the California Endowment and Movement Strategy Center. So I was like, okay, you're really wanting me to look at this, where I have my assumptions about people and what they're capable of. And also becoming the kind of person that can create a safe field for anyone to be heard without judgment. And that has been such a gift for me with all of the work that I do. I feel like when I create that safe field, not only do people come and share more openly, but actually they're teaching me so much. I learn so much from them. And then things feel like more of a co-creation and partnership with one another. So I've been really grateful for those experiences and when I can slow down enough to listen. And I'm sure that many of you have similar experiences in the work that you do. I know when Carla and I were talking about this talk, one of the things she really wanted to stress was that this really is a choice to build trust with families. It's not something that just happens. It's a choice we make about how we orient towards them. And whether we want to engage in a deeper relationship with the families that we work with. I think of it as an orientation, too. One of the gifts I had when I was at Movement Strategy Center was that I remember I was at a meeting with my boss and some of the other folks I worked with there, and we had this conversation for the coming year. What kind of movement building, organizing programs do we want to do? Who do we want to work with in the movement that's doing really innovative, amazing social justice work? And one of the things that I remember Jadon Kuhn led at the beginning of that, she said, I want us to shift orientation. We have been very acculturated in the society and in our workplaces to work in this flow, do, have, be. And I'll explain what that means. If I do this job, then I'll have this promotion, then I will be successful. If I do this degree, then I'll have that position at that company, and then I'll be happy. We are always putting off into the future who we want to be right now. And we think it's this unattainable thing until we do and have these other things. And that's a big part of the culture of the West that we've been acculturated in. And what the irony of that is we get to that B and then we just create another do, have, be. We don't actually sit in that happiness, right? Well, I got the house now, and now I want something else, And it's very tied to this very consumeristic, capitalistic culture, too. So our identity is really tied up in our doing, and that's very cultural. When I go to other countries, they don't ask me what I do for a living. They ask me, where do I come from? Where is my land? Do I have a family? Am I married? Do I have children? Your identity is about your place and your relationships. And that's probably true for a lot of your clients and probably true for a lot of you too. But that's for a lot of folks raised here in the West and in the educational system here. That is, we always ask each other, what do you do? What do you do? And it's why a lot of folks have identity crises when they retire, because their identity has been around what they do. So if you look at, yes, I know, they're poor things. They're so wrapped up so young, right? I have to do. I have no worth. I have no worth if I'm not doing. And so one of the things I think we can do to really build trust for ourselves and for other people is to really, on a daily basis, retrain ourselves to be in the orientation of be, do, have. So I remember starting at an organization one time, and there was a lot of anxiety around a new staff person coming in. And I know that we've done this at Movement Strategy Center too. In that time, Jadon said, who do we want to be for the clients we're going to work with? Who do we want to be for the organizations we're going to work with? Who are we going to be for the alliances we're going to form? Who are we going to be for our children and our partners? Who are we going to be for our communities? Who do we want to be? And it was a lovely thing. We had a big butcher paper up, and I said, well, I want us to be, supportive, loving, compassionate, liberatory, all these things. All these beautiful words came up when we started from the place of who we wanted to be. And I know I've done this exercise thinking about my relationship with my husband. I've done it in organizations and asking them, who do you want to be for the people we serve? And the most amazing conversations come up. I said, okay, now that we know who we want to be together, where there's alignment about who we want to be for the people that we serve, what is the doing that is in alignment with that? Instead of just starting with the doing, because sometimes we're just doing because it's the doing we've always done. That's the doing that we know how to do. But if we are really always have that that foundation, that direction, okay, well, I'm doing this thing, and periodically checking, is this in alignment with who I say I want to be? If I want to build a foundation of trust, like that teacher that was working with that young girl, if she wanted to build a foundation of trust, was holding back breakfast from that child in alignment with building trust, was holding that breakfast back from that child, creating a community where children can thrive and learn. So I think when we start with who we want to be, and if we make who we want to be a place people feel trust and partnership, then we'll rethink some of what we're doing. And it's okay to rethink periodically and recenter. And I think if you focus more time on be and do from that direction, the kinds of trust and relationships you want with your clients will happen naturally. You won't have, it's not something you have to make happen if you're living those ideals with them and they sense that from you. So I want to close with a few slides, which I think might inform some of the things that we'll be doing in the circles. This comes from the Australian paper again. I think what was interesting about that paper was that it also talked about some challenges that families and staff might have in these kinds of partnerships between family service providers and families. So sometimes, I think one of the things we forget is that we're human beings and things come up. We're not always going to agree. We might not always see things the same way. Challenges might come up because, on your end, you have paperwork to do, you have clients to see, you have to get things done. Or you might have commitments with those families that either you or they didn't follow through on, and there's tension around that. We're human beings, and not everything is not going to go perfect all the time. And that's part of the mythology of the West, too, is that we have to have this front that things are perfect all the time, and we can't show when we're human, we can't show when we're learning, we can't show when we're struggling. And that's one of the things I want to challenge you to look at when you're building trust and relationship with your partners and your families. Not just what you could do differently, but also invite them to explore what they can do differently so that you're building a different foundation together. Some of the things they talked about as possible examples about things that might become difficult. You or they might feel like your feelings are not being respected. That's going to come up sometimes. Either you or they might feel like you're the only ones responsible and best able to care for that child's needs, or that your idea is, or their idea is the right one. Not feeling comfortable with each other. I'm sure that's come up with clients too. And this is just reality. We're all just human beings, right? And then disagreeing with opinions. That's going to come up. We're human beings. And not knowing who to approach or how to approach when I need to ask questions or ask for resources. So those are very real conditions that can come up. And some of the things they talk about was they were really looking at this from this perspective of what a family might do. If someone's not feeling respected, for example, they could bring something to the early childhood service to share their values or beliefs, and bring photos or special occasions or festivals that can be shown to staff and shared with children. They might be invited, or they might choose to bring in some of their cultural values into the conversation or some of the projects that are happening. And staff might also share information or feelings with other staff during a meeting to understand the family's point of view. Some of you might have cultural similarity with some of the clients that you're working with, and then that other person perhaps doesn't, and they're struggling with them, and you can share your perspective in a way that's non-judgmental, not attacking them, but just like, I hear your point of view, and let me share you what I know from my experience that's just different. You know, there's always multiple perspectives. And so also just displaying the values, sharing the values that you hold. I think it's really great when you're building relationships with families to tell them from the outset, these are the values I hold in how I work with you. And if I stray from these, can you remind me so I can stay on track? Let's be in this together. I have a women's circle that meets on the new moon and the full moon every month. And we have a set of shared agreements that we all came up with. And the women are always adding to them and taking things away. It's really great. But it's co-created. And then we revisit them at the end of the circle when we remember. Sometimes we forget. But we say, like, how close are we in alignment with the values that we say we want to be in about how we treat each other? And sometimes when we veer off, this has been a really big one for me. I think we had one member once that was kind of straying from the values a lot and taking up a lot of space in the circle. And that was one of the values, to share the space. And she didn't do it maliciously, but there was an energy of her wanting to teach everyone everything she knew. And that led to a really interesting conversation in the circle about not wanting to attack her because we really loved her, but also wanting to come back to those values. And so some agreements came in about stepping up, stepping back, not taking up too much space. If you're someone who talks a lot, and stepping forward if you're someone who tends to be really quiet, so that all the collective wisdom in the room could be shared. And then also, I think what was beautiful, not only was it their agreements about trying to help manage the space so that she didn't take up so much. There are also these beautiful agreements that came out that were like, she's doing her best here. And she wants to be with us, and we don't want to exclude her. So can we have some agreements that these are new ways of being, that we're not used to being with each other? We're used to jockeying for space. And so when someone is kind of quote-unquote failing or messing up, let's not call it a mistake. Let's call it a missed take. And that when people, we're aiming to be this way together, but we've been trained to be another way. So when someone veers off, how do we gently bring them back in and into alignment and bring them back in the fold? How do we support them so they feel held while they're hearing this feedback? So if they feel they need the support, maybe some other sisters can come behind and put their hands on her back so that she feels supported as she's taking in some information that's uncomfortable to hear about the impact she's had on her sisters. And, this is a very different context than your families, but I share it because I think there's a value there about how we support families when they perhaps aren't keeping true with their agreements. One of the things I love about, my mom always told us to get good grades. And when we very rarely didn't get good grades, she'd say, "What happened?" I never got the, "God, you're so stupid." I got the, "I know you're brilliant. So what happened? What's going on? Because I know you're capable of doing this, and something else is in the way. Is there something we need to talk about?" And that came from such a different place of, "I love you, I know you're worthy, and I know you're not meeting your capability. So let's have a conversation as a safe container about, that wasn't language she used, but that's the container she created. What is going on? And I remember telling her this, that, and is going on in the family between you and Dad, and that's why I'm getting bad grades because I'm distracted by how you guys are fighting, and I'm worried about you. And then she was able to have a conversation with my dad around Brenda's worried about us, and that's why her grades are low. And so let's talk about that so we can take her distraction off of us and back onto her studies. And so I feel like there's ways that we can practice that when we're working with families too, to lean into curiosity more than judgment. The more we can move away from judgment, the more we can create those safe spaces of trust for families. So what I wanted to do, I think first, for the first round of discussions, how many are at the tables? And perhaps this is just, 6? Okay. What I'd like to do is have you share with someone next to you in a pair who you want to be for your clients. Like starting from this place, not of what I want to do with them, but who do I want to be? Think of some words that describe who you want to be for your for the families that you work with. And you'll be given about 2 minutes each to share in a pair. And if you need to move, feel free to move. And then we're going to have a little reporting back from the group. So I want to invite folks just kind of popcorn style, no, not by table necessarily, but anyone who feels compared shall share what words came up for you around who you want to be, or something that you heard in your partner share that really sat with you. Because I want to record some of them on this, and that you'll be keeping. And so feel free to raise your hand if there's something you want to share, so I can capture and not try to be doing too many at once. Don't be shy, because I think you'll find a lot of people share.
I'm trying to discover.
Trying to discover. Oh, that's great. Yeah, who would like to go?
A line we thought came up, ask questions.
Nice.
Who else feels like, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, we had 2 words. My partner had authentic, and I had humility.
Oh, nice.
We had reflective.
You want to say more about that?
Staying part of being present and partners requires us to regularly check in with what we bring to the table.
Yeah.
Not making assumptions,
Yeah.
listening, feeling that sense of groundedness in our core, I think can come from regular reflective practice.
Yeah. Yeah, and if any of you practice mindfulness or meditation at all? It's a great gift for, sometimes just even taking a few deep breaths can help you reground without having to have a big old meditation practice. A friend of mine invited me to do a mindfulness book because I think people think you have to go on like some 20-day retreat or take some mindfulness class to be grounded or present, and sometimes it's just slowing your breath or feeling your feet on the floor can help you to return back to this place. So thank you for that. My suspicion is that many of you share some of these, and there'll be more opportunity for people to share, but how many of you feel like this is something you're discovering, like the first one, that you feel like this is something perhaps that's new for you, or you're still feeling into who you want to be for your clients? How many share that? Yeah? How many of you feel that had a conversation about asking more questions of your clients? Yeah? A couple of folks there. Yeah. How many of you had conversations around authenticity? Yeah. How many around humility? Yeah. And reflectiveness, listening, groundedness in your core. Yeah. Were there others that people had that aren't reflected on here? Oh, I like that one. Yeah. There definitely have been times in my life where I've forgotten about that, and it's really hurt my relationships. And I've been grateful when people have brought it up to me. Because it's a noticing about my blind spot, right? Yeah. Uh-huh.
You kind of throw out words, trustworthy, seen as equal, person of respect, and then you kind of renumbered that because in order to be someone of respect, you have to be seen as your equal first. And then you got to build trust, and then the respect is last. But then the last question was, well, I don't even know who I want to be. Who am I now? So kind of reflecting on ourselves first before we can say who we want to be.
Yeah, and moment to moment it can change, right? Because I want to be a patient person in my family, and there are times where all of a sudden I lose my patience. And it isn't so much that I expect myself never to be impatient again, but because of mindfulness practice, I think it's a shorter time between I catch me being out of alignment with my intention, and I go, oh yeah, I got to go back to that. And what's really key to me in that is not beating myself up, because that was such a big part of my story before when I was imperfect. It's like, I messed up. And then I realized how much I brought that energy with other people when they messed up, right? And I want to have compassion and room for me to make mistakes and learn and grow, and I want to make room for other people to make mistakes and learn and grow. And when there's that culture of trust, somebody was telling me once that when you have a relationship where there's a lot of respect, a lot of affirmation, a lot of positive stuff, that when the conflict arises or the disagreement arises, then there's a sufficient foundation of relationship that you can have that hard discussion without breaking a relationship. One of the core things I get concerned about in our society is that we are really cultivated to break relationship when we disagree. And we're seeing that a lot in our country right now, incapacity to discuss difference. And also to throw people away when they make a mistake. When everybody makes mistakes, that's part of our learning process. A child who's learning to walk is going to fall sometimes. And he gets back up, and he tries again, and eventually he's walking. When we're learning to ride a bike, we do that too. And there's something about when we're children that we're okay with the falling and getting back up. But as we get older, we get cultivated in this mindset that we're not supposed to ever fail, and we're supposed to hide our failures because we don't want anybody to see them. And then I think it makes it really hard for people to learn and grow or to ask for the support they need. And so, in the place that you are with families, I think that capacity to be really transparent and honest about what's working, what's not working, what you're making your choices from, what your parameters are. Like you may want to do all kinds of things with your clients, but then you're in a structure that you have to do your job too, right? And so you can be transparent with folks about, here's what I believe, here's what my constraints are, here's what I want to do with you. And when things are not working for you, when things are not working for them, making space for that conversation is really important. Those are great. Were there other folks wanted to share?
Accessible. And I think that's both being real and present, that kind of accessible, but also time. That to make time to be present. And when we are often quite busy, however, without investing time, we miss those moments.
Yeah, I really feel that because I remember when I started my last job, I had this long list from the board of things I had to do. And I said, this is a great list and I'll get to them eventually. I said, but it's in the indigenous way, we have to build relationship first. And the doing will arise from the relationship. I can't start with the doing because that's really inauthentic. I have to be curious about how long have they been coming? And it's interesting because I started talking to people in the community and asking, how long have you been coming? What do you love about this place? What do you find challenging about this place? People had never been asked that question before, I think, and not in that way, and given that much time and attention around it either. I think they probably had been asked periodically, but not with someone that really wanted to carve some time to hear it. And also just what brought you here? What brought you here and how has this helped you? I really want to know the stories of how being part of this community has helped you and what we could do better. And I learned so much in those conversations. I had so many one-on-one conversations around not just what wasn't working, and that stuff was important for me to know, but also this, that there was a lot of energy in the community about things they wanted to build with us that they hadn't had the outlet to talk about, or if they just had a little bit of resources, they would take off and do all this stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to find you resources for that because that's a good idea, you know. And so, yeah, I think that accessibility in time and in presence is really important, that curiosity around. And people feel it. People can, you know, you could say the exact same words, but if you're like, I really want to know what you think. You know, like they can tell. I can tell. Energy is so profound. People can sense energy no matter what we say. So it really is a sense of who do I want to be? How am I expressing that? Not just in my words, but in my actions. That they feel that I want to build trust and relationship with them. I want them to feel that when they walk in the room. I want them to feel that when they're leaving the room. I want them to feel the desire to come back because they felt that with me. And you can set the groundwork for that, the soil for that to happen. So I'm going to transition next, but I want to ask if there's any other words that wanted to get put up here before I transition.
Ally, that's what I want to be, an ally.
Allied? And say more about that. I love that word. It's one of my favorite words.
Yeah, I mean, not just with immigration, but you know, in everything, I am on your side as a parent, as an adult, as a person.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think on your side is really important. I think that was one of the things in that story about my father. I think that was the first time he felt someone was on his side and why he could tell me what he told me. And he said, you know, I've never told anybody these stories about all this trauma in my childhood. And it was the first time I wasn't trying to respond or fix it or make him wrong or make his family wrong. I was just like, I'm on your side. I want to hear.
Yeah, sometimes parents trying to explain, you know, or justify something, and you have to just, you know, convey the message that I'm not judging you, I am on your side, I understand. Yeah. Or even if I don't, you know, it's not mine.
Yeah. And I feel like that judgment piece is really important. I won't really go into this here because I don't think it's the time and place, but I do a lot of work around human consciousness. And there's a lot of indigenous prophecy about the time that we're in and that we're evolving our consciousness as humanity. And it's why some of the stuff that's coming up is coming up. It's our shadow work as a society to lift up the things that need to be released and aren't working so that we can build a society that's more interconnected and loving. But I do think one of the things I've been told by some of my teachers in the consciousness world is that the place we're going to evolve into, the higher consciousness, there's no judgment and shame in that world. There's allowing people to have their experiences where they are on their path. And one of my biggest gifts to me was an elder I met in New Mexico who works with communities out there. And we went for a walk on his farm. He does a lot of really beautiful work with families and communities in New Mexico. And he said to me, a good elder, and I think this applies to anything we do, right? He said, an elder has nothing to do with your age. Some people are elders when they're young. They're born old souls. Some people get to be 80 years old and they're still not elders. They're older, but they're not elders in our indigenous sense. And he said, I want to explain to you what I mean by that. He said, a good elder is always cultivating the next generation of leaders, supporting the young people to develop their leadership. And that means making mistakes too, right? And he said, a good elder never tells you what to do. A good elder is a safe ground for that person to come and tell their story about where they're struggling. And then we'll say to them, I went through, and we'll listen without judgment, without shaming, without trying to jump in the story and tell them what to do. And at the end of the sharing, we'll say, I went through something like that once. And it was really hard. And here's what I did. And here's where I messed up. And here's what I learned. And here's what I do different this time. And if that's helpful to you, cool. And if it's not, no biggie. I'm sharing in case it might be helpful to you. That holds it lightly that way. And I think that's a big part of, if we can hold that energy when we're working with families, of really listening, sharing our wisdom from a place of, I hope this is helpful to you. And being truthful. I mean, you do have to be truthful about what works for you and what your job entails too. But when we open up that space, I know growing up when people told me what to do, I was less likely to do it. And when I was invited to consider something, and it came from this place of deep love, and here's some advice, which is really different than telling you what to do, and it's up to you, because it's your life and you're going to make your path, then I was much more able to hear that. And now that I'm older and have done a lot of mindfulness work, even when people tell it to me the hard way, I can hear it more now. But that took a lot of work to not react in that way when people tell me what to do. So yeah, I think that piece is very, very, very important, of the non-judging and not shaming, and just remembering that we're all on a path of learning and growth in our lives. People are in different places. An 8th grader is learning different things than a 1st grader. And an 8th grader doesn't judge a 1st grader for what they're doing in their coursework that year. That's just where they are. And there's a certain level of that around our spiritual journey, our life journey. We're all just in different places of learning. And the more we can hold that space of, I am where you are where you are. You may be ahead of me on this thing, I'm ahead of you on this thing. So actually, let's just share wisdom with each other. And let's cheer each other on to take the next step from wherever we are, without judgment, without shame. So what I wanted to do for your second share, I want to read these 5 things off with you and then give you just a few opportunities in your pairs again. And you can change pairs if you wish to. It's up to you. I'm going to read the 5 things off. And I'm just going to invite you to pick one. So I'll read them off twice. Once you pick the one that you pick, share with the person, what's something I can do to help that situation? What's something a family member might do to help that situation, so that we're partnering to deal with that situation together? Just as an exercise about your imagination about how you might do things differently. So feeling like your values are not respected. If you've had that experience with a family where either you don't feel respected or they don't feel respected. The second scenario is feeling like you're the only one responsible and best able to care for the child's needs. So perhaps there's been an altercation with you and a family member where you're both at odds, that you think you're the one that's responsible and has the best idea. Perhaps you've had someone you didn't feel comfortable with, or they didn't feel comfortable with you. Disagreeing with an opinion, or you not knowing how to approach someone to ask questions or seek support. Think of one scenario like that, and just you're going to share in your pairs for 2 minutes each. Here's one instance of where that happened to me. Here's what I'm thinking about, but just in this conversation, here's what I'm thinking about next time that comes up in my life, what I might do differently. Yeah? So I want to ask folks just to share popcorn style, and I won't write it down just because we have the video going, but since we all have just a few minutes left, I would love for folks to share any aha moments they're having, whether it's in the conversation that you just had with your partner, whether it's something you heard earlier, whether it's something coming through about who you want to be for your families and communities. I just want to hear popcorn style, what's coming up for people. What's an aha moment you had today, or a sharing that you want to have shared here today? Yeah?
I want to share, Brenda, that when I came in this morning, I'm stressed always about the traffic, because I come from the coast. There's no traffic. And so I'm always stressed, and then I come, and then I see the line, and I have all this pressure, and so I'm like, okay, I'll make use of my time by answering emails on the line and making the best of the time. And you started speaking, and I just stopped, and it was really good I almost felt like it was a physical relief, just to change gears and say, like, I'm actually doing a very good use of my time as an ED, really here to stop and just to reflect. And, that part about taking care of ourselves, it was just like, yeah, that's true. I think that I'm the best ED if I'm working until midnight, otherwise, not. And this kind of space, it just physically made me
feel relieved to be here so much.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being here and taking the time to take care of yourself, because that will pay hugely in your community. And they'll feel it. They'll feel it, as will you, and you deserve it too. Thank you for that sharing. Other sharings? I'm sure I'm not missing anything.
So one of the things we talked about was bringing it back to intentions, because most of our families and everyone in this room wants what's best for the children and the families, and just kind of coming from that mutual understanding, I think, helps clarify a lot of the noise that can get in the way.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really important. I remember having a challenge with someone I was helping with a project and young ones they were dealing with, and it was that thing, and I said, we're probably going to disagree a lot, but as long as we hold the intention that we want the best for this young one, and let's be in dialogue about our different opinions about what that looks like. And it really helped open up that conversation instead of fighting all the time. Yeah. So thank you for pointing that out. It's really important.
I think when I walked into the room and I saw a barista making the coffee and warming it up, to me was like walking into my mother's kitchen in the morning. And usually we have coffee. I'm not saying we don't in trainings, but having that like handmade for you individually makes a big difference, because there's just something of the warmth in that coffee, and then it just opens up. I started wanting to take notes, and I'm like, no, it's not. It's, relax and just enjoy the knowledge, take it in.
Yeah, and I love that they're taping, right? Because when I know someone's taping, I don't get so crazy about I have to write every word down. Like, I can watch it later, fine. Did you have your hand up? Okay, I thought I saw your hand. I'm sorry. Anybody else? Oh, 2. We'll go 1, 2.
I was thinking, like, what can I do for the family? What can I do for the family? But now I'm going to switch, what can I be for the family? So I will always think about that.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And
I was very touched from your speech, and also usually these meetings are very professional, but this was like human, with the human touch, with the communication, which really I like it.
Thank you. And share that with your families. When you tell them your stories, they're going to feel more trust with you too. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that sharing. Because we're all human, right? And we become human doings, and we forget we're human beings first.
Being in the space of right now.
For loving yourself enough to slow down. Because you deserve it. And you probably want that for your family. So wherever you want to put your families, you should love more for yourselves too. We have time for probably one more, and then we're going to wrap up the first burning desire of our heart to close this out.
Yes. We sort of closed our conversation with, we both agreed it was nice to get a little older because you have more perspective. But I think that perspective comes with not just age.
With experience.
It's the ability to look back and look out, and just, anyway, perspective was important.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to have us close with an affirmation. It was first given to me by one of my elders, Jerry Teo. And then I kind of modified it because of what my ancestors told me to do. And so I'll ask you to do it too as we close. And so I want you to put your hand over your heart. And I want you to say out loud to yourself, I am loved. I am a blessing. I am sacred just the way I am. I have dignity. I have wisdom and gifts for the whole. And I want you to look at each other with your hand on your heart and look around the room and say, you are loved. You are a blessing. You are sacred just the way you are. You have dignity. You have wisdom and gifts for the whole. That entire talk I give, it's really just those words and us embodying that in everything we do. May it be so.